So we're fully aware that a softbox is there to modify strobe, flash in whatever way. And as a rule, we use a softbox to diffuse the light source to kind of make it softer as it gets bigger. And we usually kind of talk about having a softbox with 2 layers of diffusion. But I think that too many kind of photographers don't play around enough with the softboxes that they have before they buy another one. So I thought we'd explore the kind of creative use of a simple softbox and how you can really kind of change some of your portrait photography without kind of really any real investment than what you've already got. So the image that we're looking at in front of us now obviously has got kind of a strip effect. But the strip effect is as simple as removing the diffusion layers from the softbox, and this is a directional softbox. So what does that mean? It means that it's fitted in front of the flash or the strobe, and basically the light is coming directly. So what actually the softbox is doing is just controlling the shape of the light. Hence that's where we can see the kind of the edge of the strobe flash kind of onto the corners of the blue and the bottom of the yellow here. But actually the strips are being caused by the likes of some strips that are just being attached with Velcro at the front of the box itself. There was a company called Lastolite. They got bought by Manfrotto, but they used to actually have a range of softboxes, and they also had a whole bunch of accessories that kind of at the time when they were launched, I thought, you know, that's pretty cool. However, how often am I going to use it? And like anything, when you start to actually then play around with these things, you start to use them more and more. So this is kind of can be done with your own softbox now. Some self-adhesive Velcro along the top and at the bottom or the sides, whichever. You can actually then get some strips of material yourself, put some kind of Velcro on the ends just with a staple gun, and basically kind of stretch them out. And by doing that, of course, you start to get this strip effect. Now, because the softbox is kind of further away than normal, usually a softbox is going to be as close as the subject as we possibly can, because obviously we're trying to allow the kind of diffusion screens, these materials that are usually in front of the light, and they're designed to soften. We want to get as soft a light as we can, so we usually use that softbox as close to the subject as we can. Here we're using it in the reverse because we're using hard light. So the further we move the light away from the subject, in fact, the softer the light becomes. However, you can see here that we still get this kind of strip effect on the background, but it's not actually evident on the portrait itself and things really. And as we kind of move camera position and we move the light position around, you can see that on the suit and on the face, there's no evidence to the actual strip kind of showing its kind of texture or its shape on the subject, just showing onto the background itself. So using these kind of strips can be a really good effect. And of course, you could then actually reposition the strips to be thicker or smaller together to get finer strip light, or a kind of a deeper black kind of mask, as it were, to actually have each one if you kind of join 2 of them together. So you can kind of really come up with some great images. This next shot, don't get confused with this light up in the top left hand side here. This is just my separation light. As a rule of thumb, I try and always separate the subject away from the background. With this kind of technique, I work in a sandwich lighting. So in other words, I've got the subject is in the middle of the sandwich, the light being the sandwich, of course, and the backlight or the separation light is usually set at least 1 to 1.5 stops less than the key light itself. Why? Because there's an expression that says the light from behind appears twice as bright. So as it hits a reflective surface, it basically will increase its intensity of light as well. Anyway, what's going on with this light? This is in fact in front of those strips. I've now put an egg crate. So why are we getting such a kind of sparkly, almost kind of foliage technique? Let me just go backwards to the original. It's because the inner of the softbox is silver and not white. Because the inner of the softbox, from both the first shot that we saw with the strips and now with this one with the strips and the actual egg crate in front. Remember, an egg crate is basically cross-hatch material that when it's stretched out, it looks like it's an egg crate, yeah, or grids, if you want to use the correct terminology, as it were. But because I've combined the two together, we're getting this kind of dappled, almost foliage light. But the reason that we're getting so much of the harsh shaping, it's because the interior of the softbox is silver and not white. If it was white, we wouldn't get as strong an effect and things. Obviously, these things that you can try out with whatever you've got. So that's a really good technique. And once more, just kind of moving around, zooming out, moving back, you can see that the texture on the subject, who's about 3 feet away from the actual background, from the light source, 4 feet as a maximum. But in the same way, the distance to the background is about the same. So he's in the middle of the light as such, and middle of the background. And by the way, the background that you're seeing here is basically 3 rolls of paper, one red, one kind of blue, and one yellow on the floor and things, really. So it's kind of a simple set and things. So from here, you can see where the kind of the light is. As a kind of a working skill set, I'll always try and get 2 catch lights in the eyes, and I want the actual light to be quite high up in the catch light. So when we talk about a 2 o'clock catch light, if we were looking into the eye, you would actually see the highlight at the 2 o'clock position if the eye was a clock. And that would be the same on both eyes. Now, obviously, with some subjects, you need to actually lower the light down a little bit more or raise their chin, because their sockets will be kind of sunken back a little bit more. That's if you want to obviously see the catch light within the eye. But if we don't do that, you're just going to get eye sockets. So try kind of play around with that. This next image is in fact using a beauty dish, but with a grid on the front. So this is just a very wide, shallow reflector dish with the grid in. So when we start to look at it, you can still see that it has the likes of the nose cone removed, because we've got this hot spot of white in the middle. If we were to see a shadow in the middle, then basically it would have the nose cone in, which would make it a beauty dish being controlled in a grid. Remember, when we're using anything to control flash, it's always at the last point of exit, whether it's a gel, softening materials, or in this case grids. It's the last point of exit of the flash before it hits the subject. That's the way we get to control the light. If this grid had some soft material on the front of it, then of course it wouldn't be a grid anymore. It would be a soft light source with just actually much smaller control. And remember what a grid does, or a honeycomb grid, small or large, it controls the spill of the light. So whereas we looked at a softbox doing the control, now we're looking at the likes of a beauty dish doing exactly the same thing. So the first thing I would do is whatever softbox you've got, even if it's a shoot-through umbrella, okay? If you've got a shoot-through umbrella, you might have an umbrella that has a removable material, which basically when the material is on, the kind of the umbrella is pointed away from the subject, and the flash is bounced into the umbrella and then comes back onto the subject. But if you take that material off, if you did exactly the same shot, obviously you'll lose a lot of the energy of the flash going through the umbrella and then going out the other side, and very little will be reflected back. So with a shoot-through umbrella, we usually then turn the umbrella around so it faces the subject. And then with that alone, you could basically have a completely different kind of quality. You could even put black tape on it, like a masking tape and so on. But you could also play around with an umbrella where you collapse it, so it kind of almost makes a smaller light around the flash, both as a shoot through and as a reflected version. But as far as the kind of the beauty dish here, this just gives us a stronger light source. That's all this is doing, okay? So with a beauty dish, when you have that nose cone, remember what the nose cone does, it bounces the light into the middle, bounces back into the dish. If the dish is white, it's a soft light. If the dish is a silver or a knurled kind of effect, you have a sharper light source. But when you take away that basic nose dish, what happens then, it just becomes a hard light being controlled by the shape of the dish. When it then comes out, of course, if we're putting the likes of a grid on, it's just controlling it into a smaller light source again to allow less spill. And it's one of my favorite techniques, in fact. Then you kind of take off that grid, and you can see the difference there straight away. As soon as I take off that grid, you get this big wrap of light. Okay, this is without the nose cone on. So in other words, we've got the shot where we've got the grid on. You can see the difference in the quality compared to the shot here where we've taken the grid off the beauty dish itself. Then we go, okay, so what's it like when we just use a small reflector dish, the attachment that comes with most of your studio flashes to protect the flash or to allow a little bit more of control of spill of the light, especially when using the likes of an umbrella where it controls the light so it pushes forward instead of just exploding out to the sides. Because remember, that's what all kind of reflector dishes and softboxes are doing anyway. They're trying to control the light. So you can see now what we've just got is a very controlled light, a bit like we're using a speed light, and it's controlled onto the subject, hence we get this very hard shadow behind. And obviously the more we basically higher or lower the light, the shadow is going to move, and so will actually the light on the face. If we look at the face here for a minute, you can see that even though the catch light looks like it's at the 2 o'clock position, in fact it's not. It's only because he's lowering his chin. And what we've got here is a nose shadow that is going out to the 9 o'clock position. This tells us straight away that this light, in the classic use of light in portraiture, is too low. So it's kind of directional, kind of pushing the shadow and not kind of pushing it down. As a kind of a working skill set, I would encourage you to play around with trying to get the shadow from the nose to come down towards the lip. And that's where we get that nose lip shadow, which more or less tells you your light is in the right place. Now, obviously, if you're using a softbox and it's very, very close to the subject, there's times where you can't see the kind of the nose shadow as pronounced as we just saw it because it's so diffused. And obviously what a diffusion does to the light, it softens the shadow. And the only way to really kind of create more shadow with a softbox is to either use a very, very small softbox and start to move it further and further away. Now, of course, if you're using a big softbox, a similar thing can happen as well. As you move the light away, the light becomes more contrasty in its shape because it's being controlled. So again, thinking about what we're trying to do, very, very similar. We're using just the big deep dish now, and this is going to control the light more. If we kind of step backwards, if you look at the background, and that's why I've kind of got some really wide shots here for you to see, yeah? But if we look at the background, you can see how the edge shadow, the edge of the light is kind of fading away, so it's more of a gradient effect. When you use the likes of a deep dish or even a deep softbox, the transition from the highlight area through the kind of the mid-tone to the shade is going to be more exaggerated. So as you can see here, if we're looking close up on the background, we've got very, very defined dark, then we've got a gradient, and then we go to the light. So that is because of the deep dish itself kind of creating this kind of shape and things, really. By the way, this kind of dish that I use a lot in maternity photography because it almost creates a bump effect actually onto the background as well. So you can see the depth of the actual reflector dish here. Now, with the likes of Elinchrom, if you're an Elinchrom user, some of the flash manufacturers might do a similar thing, but because the mono head, so in other words, a studio flash head that kind of stands alone, it has a umbrella shaft in the actual head itself. So what it means is that we can put the nose cone from the likes of a beauty dish into any of the accessories to give us a different look and feel again. And in fact, Elinchrom do a range of nose caps, deflector caps, I think is the true word for them. But they do like a clear one, a diffused one, a gold one, a silver one, to kind of just name a few of them and things really. But it kind of really gets some shots. And this is where we can get some really, really dramatic effects then with the actual light. And I love this deep dish because it gives me what I feel like it's almost like a sunlight quality to the harsh lighting as such. And then we start to look at controlling the light in a much smaller way where we use the likes of a snoot. And to be fair, I'm not a massive fan of snoots unless we're looking for it to be used in a creative. So I see so many photographers in their early days of using flash and studio flash use a snoot as a hair light. For me, there's just basically not enough spread of the light or not enough control of that light, even though some snoots come with a little honeycomb attachment to go on the front to control the light more. I tend to actually use a snoot more actually on towards the actual subject themselves to actually create a more dramatic fall off from the light to the actual shadow like we've seen here. It reminds me of a very much a stage effect. Don't get a snoot confused though with the likes of a magnified light. So now you can see on the background there's a much more defined shadow, a sharpness here, and almost a kind of a kind of a glacier kind of look, like it's kind of going through glass, because that's exactly what it's doing. This has a movable piece of glass in front of the snoot that when we push it forwards and backwards, it sharpens the actual flash compared to a snoot. So even though we've got a great effect here, and if you haven't got a snoot, definitely buy a second-hand one if you can lay your hands on it, because they'll often sit in a cupboard not being used and collecting dust. With so many photographers, it's a bit of a shame. But as I said, even if you use it for a creative light more than anything else. The magnified light, I think there's a lot more people who play around with this with the likes of a speed light, because they're much cheaper to actually buy and everything else with and things. And you can buy some which have a kind of a 50mm lens on the front of the actual magnification to sharpen the light in, and you can even use it with gobos for patterns and so on with it. So this piece of glass here can actually kind of move in and out in a male and a female way to basically change the sharpness of the actual light, and you can get some really, really great effects and things. And, then when you're trying to play around with light, of course, think about perhaps just even bouncing it off walls, bouncing it off anything. I've just put a silver sheet up here to show you how it kind of just makes the light very big. The likes of a warm blanket like runners use on marathons and everything else, it's a really great product to actually use to bounce light off. Remember that it doesn't guarantee they're going to be heat resistant, so make sure that you're kind of using it at a safe distance. There are special photographic or theatre foils for you to invest into big sheets and so on with it. But this is just a warm blanket that, as I said, a runner would use and so on. And this can give you a very, very big, bright, and quite a softish kind of light, even though we've got some shadow kind of going on in here and things. We can even then kind of change the reflector or deflector on the flash itself to control the shape of the light, and even that will give you a different quality of light again and things really. That will control the light down. But as a rule, what we're trying to do is kind of get that light up higher. If you find yourself that if you're photographing with or without an accessory on the front, like a softbox or whatever, and this light is at the same height as the head, I would implore you to try and practice to move that light above the head position and then almost point down. Okay, so if you're into the habit where you've got that light just pointing directly at the subject and it's at about the same height as the head, you're going to see these kind of background shadows, but you're also going to change the quality of the light in onto the face. And if you're into portrait photography, I would definitely start to actually have this head where it's almost above the client's head and pointing down towards them as such. So, this is really all about playing around with flash. It doesn't matter if it's a studio flash like we're using here or you're using the likes of a speedlight flash. It's all great fun, but experiment with it. And obviously the more you experiment, the more fun you'll have as well.